So let's put several of these ideas together. I'm going to run through a few examples to use the techniques and the concepts we've already explored in combination with each other. And the first example I'm going to do here is this countdown page, where I can type into the text box, put in say 3 and click the button to say start countdown, and I get this little JavaScript timer going on. Now this is not spectacularly impressive, I grant you, but as you'll see, it's a good example of several techniques put together. Now step 1, I've chosen to make this page as simple as possible so we can focus on the script. In fact, if I look at the HTML here, I can see there really isn't much going on. I've got a little bit of basic CSS at the top, but the body of the page itself is simply a container div, which inside has another div which has nothing in it, and one h1. In fact, on this page itself, I don't have the HTML for this text box or this button. I'm going to generate that content through JavaScript, and then I'm going to add the logic to work with it. So let me open the JavaScript and show you what's going on here. First off, I have the window.onload anonymous function here. So as soon as the page is loaded, I'm going to run this code. And what we're doing here is creating a couple of new elements. I'm using document.createElement here to create a new input element. It's going to be a text box, and I'm going to give it an ID of minutes. Then I'm going to create a button. Again, it's an input element, but this one has a type of button. I'll give it some text, which is start countdown, and then I'm going to associate the click event of that button with a function called start countdown, which we'll explore in a second. And then finally, these last two lines simply take my two new elements and they add them to the div called input area. So that's what creates these parts of the page. Now, if I put in, say, some text here and click this button, it's going to pop up an alert called please enter a number, which makes sense. Let's see what's happening. I said the click event is associated with a function called start countdown, and here it is. The first thing we do is try and grab the contents of that text box, which we're using the .value property of. And then I'm using the isNan function to check, is it not a number? So if this minutes variable is not a number, I'll pop up an alert, and then I'm just going to hit return, which basically means I'm done with this function. I'm not going any further. I can't do anything else. It doesn't make sense anymore. Now, however, if it is a number, we'll just scoot right past that if statement. And then what I'll do is I'll find out how many minutes they typed in. I'll multiply that by 60, and I'll store it in a variable called seconds remaining. Now, seconds remaining is a variable that I've actually declared right at the top of my JavaScript. It is a global variable of which I have 2, just because I'm going to use those from different functions. So we create it there. What I'm then going to do is call the setInterval function. This is the one that calls a method repeatedly. And the method we're going to call is tick, and we're going to call tick every 1000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. And if you remember from when we originally talked about setInterval, if you ever want to be able to clear the interval, i.e. to stop this interval from reoccurring, you need to grab a variable to it. You need to grab a handle on it, which you can then call later to call clear interval. So we count the number of seconds, we kick off the tick function every 1 second, and then what I'm going to do is actually hide, it's not really a form, but I'm going to hide that input area that has the text box and the button, because I don't need to show it when the clock is ticking. So this must be the more interesting function, which is tick, which is defined a little bit up here. Let's bring this up. And just going through this one, first line, I will grab hold of a variable called time display, and that is simply grabbing hold of the h1, which is showing the time. So it's just grabbing hold of this part of the page. Then what I'm going to do is turn the seconds that I have, which is stored in the seconds remaining variable, into minutes and seconds. The first thing I do is divide seconds by 60. That will give me the amount of minutes and then some number after the decimal point. So I use what's called the math.floor function, so that's the built-in part of JavaScript, to say I want to take something that might be 4.2 and make it just 4, just make it a basic integer with nothing after the decimal point. Now I'm using the term .floor rather than .round because I don't want to round up and round down. I just want to ignore any remainder. I'm just interested in the minutes. Now, in the same way, what I can do in this next line is just figure out what the seconds remaining are. And I'm just going to subtract minutes times 60 from seconds remaining. That will give me the remainder. Several ways, of course, I could calculate this. On line 18, I'm asking one question: how many seconds are left? And if those seconds are less than 10, I want to add a leading 0 to it, because if we're counting down, I don't want it to say 1:1. Most digital watches and so on will always have a leading 0 when your seconds get down beyond 10. So this is what I'm doing here, and I'm using 0 as a string, so in the double quotes, so that when these two are added together, it will turn the number 5 into 05 or the number 9 into 09. I finally take both my min variable and my seconds variable and add them together. If you're bothered about official type conversion, meaning that if min is a number, how can I explicitly say it's a string? I could use the .toString method here. I don't need to do that. This would work just fine. This concatenation will join the number that's stored in min, then a colon, and then finally we change what the page actually displays. The last couple of things to check is, did our seconds get down to 0? And if so, we can pop up an alert saying we're done. We don't need to start calling this tick function anymore, so I'll click clear interval, and I'll finally call reset page, which is going to show the section of the page that would allow me to kick the countdown off again. And the very last line here is subtract 1 from seconds remaining, because this is the function that's called every second. We want to make sure that we're counting down. Finally, the reset page function is this one line here that's going to make the input area display itself again. And that's what's going to allow us to do a little bit of error checking here and then feed in a little bit of information. And sure, this might be a simple example, but we are using it to do all the common JavaScript tasks. We are creating DOM elements, actually creating the page content dynamically through JavaScript. We're using events, both the window.onload event and also the button on click event. We're doing error checking of the input, making sure that in this case it is a number before we try and do anything with it. We're creating intervals to repeatedly call functions every second. We are hiding and showing parts of the page. We're using the math object to do our calculations. We're popping up alerts, and we're grabbing and changing elements. And these are all the same things that you'll be doing in every JavaScript program. Now, this example certainly isn't perfect. I could add more error checking to check for a minimum and a maximum value. I could generate a pause button that might show up when the countdown begins. I could make the text change color as it gets closer to 0. And you should be able to figure out several ways this could be improved and extended. So take a look at it and see what you can do.